Welcome to this weekend drive edition of Daily Drive for the second week in June 2024. I'm Jamie Butters, executive editor of Automotive News in Detroit.
And I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today, we're breaking down some of the biggest stories in the auto industry from the past week and looking forward to what's in store in the days ahead. We'll hear from Automotive News Ford reporter Michael Martinez about Ford's new unveiled mobility and tech campus after a 6-year restoration of Detroit's massive train station. That's coming up in a few minutes. But first, Jamie, how you doing?
Good, Cal. How about you?
Doing all right, doing all right. Let's get into some news. U.S. Senator Joe Manchin is urging U.S. companies to sue the Treasury Department. He believes the final local content in the Inflation Reduction Act is watered down. Jamie, this is a bill that he helped write. What are your thoughts on his stance?
Yeah, well, it's not the auto companies that he expects to do the suing. It's the mining companies, and that's who he really represented and represents, right? As a senator from West Virginia, he's representing the mining interests, and he fought hard. The main thing he brought to it was the efforts to keep Chinese minerals out of the subsidized EVs. He wanted to see more investment in, U.S. mining, North American mining, mining with allies. And so he's worried about it. I think the auto industry is a little relieved to have this pushback, some of this deadline pushed back a couple of years. The concern for him and maybe some of the mining companies and their investors is that you push it back a couple of years and then maybe a couple more years, and then pretty soon you've really watered down all of the domestic content rules and lose that domestic impact. But it's hard for the industry because it's the automaker investors are impatient, and it takes years and years to develop a mine and a mineral and a refining complex.
Gotcha. And also, Jamie, this was interesting this week. We learned that Stellantis is possibly parting ways with some of its suppliers to cut costs. Now, do you think we'll see this from more automakers turning to insourcing to save on the cost of making EVs? Or do you believe that may be just a temporary fix?
Automakers are looking at everything they can to save money, save costs on EVs. The price of them is still really challenging for consumers, so it's a problem for the automakers. But you see different strategies. Stellantis, Carlos Tavares has been really relentlessly pushing to cut costs and leaning on the supply base, saying they're the ones who are going to have to come up with most of the savings. So this is his well, the what else or what, the answer to or what is, well, we'll do it ourselves, right? But you see different strategies. Toyota has been pushing their suppliers really hard. They're actually backing off a little or trying to give them extra money to spend on the well-being of their employees. Ford had the strategy implemented a couple of decades ago to have a really narrow group of suppliers, try to get to know their cost basis really well and reward them with volume as a way to save money. But now they're opening it up to more companies. Kind of looks like they're looking for more innovation, trying to find more of the new ideas that come up from the supply base that make their vehicles really compelling to consumers. So each company really picks their strategy based on where they are as a company and what their priorities are. But it is fascinating to watch it play out.
And finally, Tesla CEO Elon Musk has told NVIDIA to prioritize shipments of AI processors to his companies X and XAI over the electric vehicle maker. Why would he do this now?
Well, he says that they don't really have the need for all those chips. They don't have enough cars. They're not making enough cars to put them all in the right usage. But there's a lot of hand wringing out there among Tesla investors. They're worried that his focus is not on the car maker, but on the other companies that he's super excited about. And this all plays out against the backdrop of the battle over his compensation. A judge threw out his $56 billion compensation package. It's now back before shareholders. And a lot of people see this as him sending a signal to Tesla shareholders. If they don't fight to get him the shares that he feels he deserves, that he had negotiated originally with his very friendly board, maybe his priorities and his focus will be on X, XAI, SpaceX. Tesla without Elon Musk is just not the trillion-dollar company that it's come to be known as, and this is a really sort of an existential fear for Tesla shareholders, and that might be what's really going on.
Oh, so this is a case, as what the kids would say, run me my money. Interesting.
He wants his money run, that's for sure.
That's it. Coming up, Ford just celebrated the opening of its new mobility campus in Detroit with performances from Eminem, Diana Ross, Jack White, and many more. We'll hear from Automotive News staff reporter Michael Martinez about Ford's newly unveiled mobility and tech campus after a 6-year restoration of Detroit's massive train station.
Welcome back to Weekend Drive. I'm Jamie Butters with Kellen Walker. Ford's top executives hailed the automaker's restoration of the long-derelict Michigan Central Station as a symbol of Detroit's and the company's future as part of a star-studded reopening celebration. The station is part of a $950 million mobility campus project that began with Ford's 2018 purchase of the 18-story building. It had sat vacant since the last train departed in 1988. For 3 decades, its hollowed-out windows and graffiti-covered halls had been a favorite target for scavengers and a symbol of Detroit's decline. No longer. I was at the opening night concert along with our own Michael Martinez, who joins me now to talk about it from his home office in Detroit. Michael Martinez, welcome back to Weekend Drive.
Thanks for having me.
All right, it's very festive times here in Detroit. We just had this big concert, really a one-of-a-kind Detroit show this week to celebrate the reopening of the Michigan Central Station. Tell us a little about your impressions of this very Detroit-centric concert.
Well, Jamie, I love my job, but some days are a little more fun than others. And that concert we were both at, it was pretty special. I don't know if there's been that level of musical talent gathered together in the city, maybe ever, if not for a very long time. Motown legend Diana Ross, Eminem, Jack White lives near the train station, born and raised there, right? Very, very cool, up and down. Every one of these people could have had been the headliner for their own show, and they all came together. 20,000 people in Corktown in front of the train station. It was a windy night, a little chilly at times, but still really fun environment.
Yeah, and it really also, Eminem was one of the executive producers, and the professionalism and the level of care in the production of it, the lighting, the pyrotechnics, the staging, but also just the care in the casting of it, because you had really all forms of Detroit music represented. Like you said, yeah, Motown and the White Stripes, sound and Eminem, but also, like gospel from the Clark sisters. We had electronic music with DJ Sky. Bob Seger was represented. He wasn't there, but Melissa Etheridge and Jelly Roll and another artist, performing his songs. Who was the other? Fantasia? Was that?
Yep.
Yeah. Just really great collaborations, really great production. They really moved things along. It was such a celebration, just really, celebrating Detroit. This had been the train station had been, and really an icon of Detroit's decline. Right, at least for the most of the decades I've been here, and so there was just so much excitement. Really, all these Detroit-centric acts, but a lot of emphasis on the city and on how well it's doing, which sometimes is very much in sync with the auto industry. Not always, but this definitely had a lot of positive energy.
Definitely.
It reminded me. The only thing I can compare it to, and I think you're absolutely right about there's probably never been a talent collection like this, at least maybe since the peak days of Motown or something. But there were a couple events that GM had earlier in this century, right before, in the years before the great global financial crisis. The Detroit Auto Show, as you recall, used to be the first week in January, and it would start on Sunday. So thousands of international press would fly in, from Asia and Europe, and they'd come to Detroit on Saturday. There wouldn't be anything going on. They'd be stuck in their hotel rooms complaining about the weather and it really became this sort of negative vibe about Detroit that was carried out globally. So GM held a party. They called it GM Style. They had a head of marketing, Mike Jackson, in those days, who was very plugged into the Hollywood scene. They were sponsors of the Oscars in those days. They did one year. They had sort of a fashion show with their their cars and their celebrities in fancy clothes. And then they had a concert by John Legend, and that was kind of neat. The next year was a little more like what we saw this week. They had Maroon 5, Mary J. Blige, and then Kid Rock with special guest Rev Run from Run DMC. Very cool party, but it was smaller. It was really just for the automotive media, and GM people, maybe some local politician types. Last night, this week's event was really open to everybody. It was a city party, just an amazing get together.
And yeah, I think that sort of speaks to the larger point here of why this train station purchase and rehab is important. Certainly, if you're an Automotive News subscriber, not from Michigan, not from Detroit, you may be wondering why we're talking so much about what's going to amount to a fancy, expensive office building. But just look at the talent that did come in, that did agree to perform, because it's painting Detroit in a good light. You mentioned how it's been a symbol of decline. What do you mean by that? Any story you read about Detroit over the past 20 years or so, through its bankruptcy, through the Great Recession, usually had a photo of the abandoned train station. It's bombed out windows and graffiti all over the hallways and columns, and just was not a good look for the city. And purchasing it, Bill Ford said something ahead of the concert. He said the train station for so many years was Detroit's Ellis Island. It's where immigrants or visitors from around the world would come into the city on those trains, and it would be their first impression. These ornate golden chandeliers and marble floors and limestone columns, and this was their first impression of the city, a really good impression. And now, with it reopened, it's going to be a community hub, eventually have first floor retail and restaurants, a place for city residents, for visitors to gather again and really have a good view of what Detroit and its people can offer.
Of course, not surprising for an event like this. The mayor was there, the governor was there, local, sports celebrities. Barry Sanders was there. Almost people started chanting for him. That was pretty fun. But one thing that was so impressive, they had video, congratulations from various people sending in video messages. The CEO of Microsoft, the CEO of Google, but also the CEO of General Motors, Mary Barra, left a message to congratulate Ford and thank everyone who was involved in getting the train station back. It was a nice moment and really nice gesture on her part.
Definitely a nice touch, even as GM, in a way, abandons one Detroit iconic building, but goes to another, a still under construction skyscraper that sits at the former site of another landmark, the old Hudson's department store. So dueling landmark redevelopment, office space acquisitions by the Detroit automakers here.
Yeah. You're right. That contrast is a little bit painful. There's, I think, a little bit of anxiety that the Renaissance Center, which has been GM's home for the last couple decades, at least last few decades, could become the next train station, the next, big abandoned eyesore. And of course, a lot of hope around something better than that happening, and not having to wait 40 years for that one to make a comeback.
For sure.
So, Mike, you mentioned, ground floor retail. I know there was talk about maybe a hotel. I think there might be some condos built into some of the elite spaces, but it sounds like most of the space is really devoted to sort of tech startups and trying to encourage entrepreneurism in the area.
That's right. So, in addition to the train station, there's another building right next door called the Book Depository Building. That's sort of the home for the startups. The train depot itself, the tower there, will be home to about 2,500 Ford workers, mostly concentrated on the EV development side on software. So, think the Model E team, most
Mhm.
likely, will be based there. We don't know for certain yet, but it's, Bill Ford, Jim Farley have said they want it to sort of represent the future of the company and be a differentiator for this sort of young tech talent they want to steal away from Silicon Valley.
We still call it the train station because that's what it was, and it's Michigan Central Station. It does not have train service at this time, but there was some talk that maybe even this auto-backed resurrection of the building could lead to the return of train service from Amtrak or somebody else.
That's something Bill Ford's hinted at. He said he'd like to see it, but there's a lot of red tape and things you'd have to go through working with Amtrak to get that to happen. Not in the near term, maybe in the future, though.
Well, we like to cover all things transportation, even though our name is Automotive News. We pay attention to all of it, so we'll stay on top of that. Michael, I hope all of our listeners can go on autonews.com and see your or get a hold of the paper to see your photos and some of the videos you took. Really appreciate you using your visual skills as well as your writing skills to help tell this story.
It was a fun one.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That's all for this weekend drive edition of Daily Drive. I'm Jamie Butters.
And I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer for his help on today's podcast. You can get the latest news on Ford's Michigan Central Mobility Campus, supplier relations, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com.
Come back on Monday for a conversation about how sound designers are trying to create EV noises to keep pedestrians safe. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. If you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.